Hello and welcome to the 34th talk in NOAA's Environmental Leadership Seminar Series, also known as NELS. The goal of these seminars is to share examples of NOAA's federal leading role in environmental science by those who lead it and make it happen. My name is Andy Bailey with NOAA's National Weather Service Forecast Office in Kansas City, and I'm your host for today's seminar. I'd like to take a moment for a few acknowledgments and a little bit of webinar logistics. To start, first to thank the NOAA Science Council for sponsoring these webinars and the NELS team who plan and execute them. Dr. Hernan Garcia, oceanographer with NESDIS NCEI. Katie Poser, outreach librarian and NOAA Central Library with NOAA's OAR. Sandra Klar, the administrative officer with NESDIS CFO. And Robert Levy, NOAA studio production manager. Now here's a few seminar logistics. First, this seminar is being recorded for later viewing and it will be made available in a few days. After this introduction, Mary Erickson will present and then we'll take questions from the audience online. Online attendees may post their questions into the Adobe Connect Q&A box anytime and we'll get to as many of the questions as we can. All attendees are muted. We also want to thank in advance DAS for the closed captioning. Now, today's Environmental Leadership Series seminar is titled Building Resilience by Transforming the Way People Receive, Understand, and Act on Weather, Climate, and Water Information. And our speaker is Mary Erickson, Deputy Director of NOAA's National Weather Service. Mary's primary responsibilities include leading National Weather Service major change initiatives, ensuring accurate and timely service delivery to key stakeholders, supporting management, labor relations, and building important relationships with America's weather industry. She also champions water and inundation programs and directs efforts to improve employee engagement through the organization, or I should say throughout the organization, that supports a culture where belonging, inclusion, and diversity can thrive. She has a distinguished career and served in a variety of roles across NOAA for more than 30 years, and most recently as the Director of the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, an office in NOAA's National Ocean Service. Welcome, Mary. The floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you, Mary.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Andy, for that wonderful welcome. And I'm honored and delighted to be a speaker in this seminar series. And I do want to give a shout out and a huge thanks to all the organizers that you mentioned to keep this robust dialogue that's a part of the NOAA Environmental Leadership Seminar Series going across NOAA. It's been going for quite a while. That's excellent. So my title today is Building Resilience by Transforming the Way that People Receive, Understand, and Act on Weather, Water, and Climate Information. It's a big title, but it's also a big challenge. And it's one that we at the Weather Service are incredibly passionate about as we do our part to advance resilience in connection with NOAA's priorities on climate and service equity. So today, what I'd like to do is set the stage for the conversation. First off, just a note, I do want this to be a conversation, as Andy said, so please get your questions ready as I'm speaking. So to set a little bit of context, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the societal challenges, and then I'd like to outline at a high level the Weather Service response and focus that we have, priorities on people, infrastructure, and the future. And then I'll talk a little bit about what it looks like for us to embed service equity and this transformation into our mission activities that we do every day. And of course, talk a little bit about the partners that we're working with to get this done. And then because it is a leadership seminar series, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the leadership challenges that are part of this effort. All righty. So let's get started. Many of you across NOAA are probably familiar with this. Just publicly released the 2022 statistics from our National Centers for Environmental Information 2 weeks ago. So it's been busy. In 2022, we experienced 18 weather disaster events with losses exceeding $1 billion each. And so these events, as you can see here, included drought, many severe storm events, 3 hurricanes, a wildfire event, a snow event, just a real breadth of different types of extreme events, but also, a very rapid fire. And as a matter of fact, one of the things is it's getting busier. If you look at the statistics from 1980 to 2022, we averaged 7.9 events over that 30-year span each year. In just the last 5 or 6 years, it's 17.8 events. So every few weeks, we're having one of these extreme events. We just saw the atmospheric river events 3 in a row, which, once you start getting those accumulating and cascading effects, really can have an impact on our communities. So one of the things I'm talking about today is these kinds of, the underpinning behind these is the changes that are happening in our climate across the Earth system. A lot of them play out on the time scale, on the weather time scale, excuse me. So some of the priorities for our Climate Ready Nation effort, things like flood, drought, heat, and fire, you see them right here. And so we're working really hard to address these things. We've been talking about these increases for a few years now, and now we're adding a different magnifying glass to this service transformation to try to respond to that. And one of the things I'm going to talk about today is that lens of ensuring that the services we provide and how we respond to this are done from a service equity perspective. So we do it equitably and justly for all communities. So another big picture look at the types of extremes that we're dealing with is this is the 2022 Davis Global Risk Report. It'll probably be coming out for 23 here in the next month or so. Every year they do this and look across all of the globe's challenges, all the different issues. You see things like the debt crisis and geoeconomic confrontation, but look at the top 2, climate action and extreme weather, and the top 2 across the whole globe. That's pretty sobering to think about the work that we need to do in these spaces. And one of the things that we're thinking about at NOAA, of course, is to take a different approach or double down, if you will, on thinking about this holistically. So integrating all the spheres of Earth system prediction together, looking at the challenges at a different scale. It's a complete Earth system, and that Earth system includes humans. As you can see in this figure that I borrowed from UCAR and UCAR's president, Tony Busalaki, you start with the things that maybe many of us across NOAA are used to thinking about oceans, thinking about atmosphere, thinking about ice, even thinking about the biological systems. But we haven't as much until the last decade or so really thought about, okay, how does the human system come into this? And so thinking about that and making sure that we focus on humans, focus on people, focus on the social science aspects of these interfaces, and really seriously look at where we have gaps in our understanding from a research and development perspective, from a science perspective, a data perspective, as well as a services perspective. Because this is what it's going to take for us to address these extreme events across a whole host of societal challenges. When you start to think about these things together, it's impacting our coastal resilience, where we're seeing accelerations of change. It's impacting issues like water availability, quality, and risks. It's impacting issues like our ocean atmosphere variability and what that has in terms of impacts of systems that are impacting our West Coast, like California, flopping back and forth between record-breaking drought and then having the atmospheric river events after that. So all of these things are coming together in ways that are even more and more challenging. So what I want to talk a little bit about is how the Weather Service is responding to these challenges. As I mentioned, the demands for receiving and understanding clear and actionable weather, water, and climate information are growing in response to these increasing extreme events. So we're trying to transform at the Weather Service to be more nimble, more flexible, and mobile as we engage with people, with partners, and making sure that the communities we serve are getting the information they need. So I do want to start here with the transformation with talking about people. One of the things that's wonderful about the Weather Service is we live and serve in the communities that we serve. We live there. We're all across the country, from Guam to Puerto Rico to Maine to Alaska, all across the country. We are in those communities, sitting right next to the folks that we are working with to try to save lives, protect property, and enhance their economy. So it has both an internal and external component. So first, we do need to be sure that our own employees who are working that 24/7, 365, that they work in an inclusive, empowering, safe, and flexible environment. And also making sure that we're looking forward so that we're developing those employees, we retain those employees, and also building the next generation, not only of leaders, but also next generation of scientists who are we're trying to attract into the organization. And so that helps us look like the communities we serve. So one of our major focus areas is on recruiting and retaining those employees. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Externally, we're working with other federal partners in the resilient space, as well as social scientists, to learn how communities perceive their risks and looking at what better outreach strategies we could have way in advance of actual extreme events, so that everybody understands what to expect when these things, when warnings do come their way. So that's a really a key component. We'll talk a little bit more in terms of service equity. Next, I'm going to jump to the end and talk a little bit about our future. This is all about driving the changes that will allow us to be nimble, mobile, flexible, being right there with our partners that are the actual decision makers. For example, we can make a great forecast, but we're not the ones who are going to issue those evacuation orders. Those are emergency managers and other folks at state and local government levels. So it's really important to build that continuity from the national to the regional and state level down to the local level, as well as that continuity across all of our different forecast systems. So we're looking very hard at how we can become a leader in equitably providing these weather, water, and climate services. So a few things that we're focusing on here is, one of them is making sure that we can have an operations model that really responds to this kind of changing extreme events and needs. So making sure that that operations model is up to date and that we've got staffing strategies to meet that those new demands. So we're also looking at making sure we've got workplace flexibility to help create that great working environment, and that we can build in that decision support tools at all levels of the organization. We're also looking to harness and work with new capabilities with ensemble forecasting, worn-on forecast, partnering very closely with our colleagues in OAR to make sure that we're taking the best probabilistic information we can to drive IDSS. Because what we've learned in this process of building a weather-ready nation over the past decade is folks really want to understand what's the worst case scenario and what's the most likely scenario, and really talking to people in terms of scenarios and digesting information. At the same time, there is so much information at higher resolution that we have to have the right tools for our forecasters to digest and visualize this information and then be able to communicate it excellently to those decision makers. So that's one of our big areas, advancing our probabilistic forecasting. And one of the things we talk about this is improving and implementing hazard services, making sure that we can provide things in from a shape perspective, polygons, not necessarily just a point forecast, and making sure those are as honed and focused as much as possible so we're not overwarning. This is a big breakthrough that we've made in our hurricane forecasting, for example, over the last decade, and it makes a huge difference. The better we can have that track and intensity forecast, the less people have to needlessly evacuate. That can save a lot of money, helps the economy as well. Lastly, I did want to mention, there's so many on this list. I'm happy to answer any questions folks have. I don't have time to go through them all, but I do want to note that also we're partnering with industry and our colleagues in OAR on the next generation radar. That may not be till the 1930s, I'm dating myself, till the 2030s, 2040 timeframe, but it's not too early for a major acquisition system to have to replace our NextRad system. We're really excited about that and anticipating where the new technology is going to be able to take us. This is going to be a major part of our future as well as also looking at all of our infrastructure and where we can smartly leverage cloud technology. Okay, so speaking of things like cloud and radar, I wanted to talk a little bit about infrastructure. So I wanted to lay out that future because then when you think about it, we need the infrastructure that supports that future. We need infrastructure that's going to support flexible and nimble operations. It has to be the transformation we're looking for has to be supported by modernized infrastructure. So one of the principles we're bringing into this is we can't build it all ourselves. So we're leveraging what's being done in the commercial sector and with our partners in academia in terms of the science and thinking about how we build that next generations of systems. We've got amazing systems now, and we want to take them to that next level, especially being able to expand capacity nimbly as you need it, as much as you need, in the right place and when you need it, and making sure that our team within the Weather Service has the right tools for the mission at all times. Okay. So that's our approach, if you will, to prioritizing and helping focus this transformation. I did want to mention a little bit about how we do this with our own workforce. Several years ago, as we were working on our strategic plan, which we're updating now, we came together to articulate a few core principles by which we operate. And these are things they were not necessarily aspirational. These are really core to the way the Weather Service works and operates. So first off, as I've been talking about people, our people drive our success, and we reiterate that day in and day out. We understand our director, Ken Graham, often says, take care of the people and the people will take care of the mission. And so this is absolutely key, and we don't ever want to forget that. Also, just, a very simple clarity that we are trying to provide the best forecast possible. We understand it would, try to use that word forecast now in a much broader sense. I'm going to talk a little bit about decision support in a minute. The technical forecast itself is not enough. You have to be able to translate that to decision makers. And as I mentioned, we can't do it alone. It takes our partners across NOAA to be able to meet these goals and transform, but it also takes partners in the weather, water, climate enterprise, and it takes our core partners who are the decision makers themselves. And more as we work on service equity, we're recognizing it takes our partners in the community, the other leaders and thought leaders in the community that are the ones that can help communities take action. So we're working towards that, and across all of these things, whether it be science or services, we're striving for excellence to continually improve. So as I mentioned, this transformation is about ensuring that our forecasters can flexibly be with those decision makers step by step, that they're available eye to eye when these high impact events are happening in the emergency operations centers, able to provide briefings as needed, connecting our excellent forecasts and wordings into that critical decision space. So this is what we call impact-based decision support services. You might hear your friendly Weather Service colleague talk about IDSS. That's what we mean. It's all about decision support. And really, this is something we do across NOAA and many of our NOAA missions with our colleagues in Ocean Service and other places, always making sure that folks have that information. One of the things that's key to the way the Weather Service does this is we work very hard on relationship building. So in an emergency event, that is not the first time that an emergency manager is meeting their warning coordination meteorologist from their local WFO. These folks are on speed dial. They have each other on their cell phones. They can call anytime 24/7. So they've got those relationships built and they understand how to talk to one another. We also, we do exercises, we game things out. We're always working together on lots of tabletops and engagement so that everybody knows who's going to do what. And this is really key because trust is at the core of making these decisions and transforming in these face of extreme events. So just to kind of drive this home, it's all about people, right? It's, previously we've focused sometimes about making sure that we release information, that it's one size fits all, but it's not necessarily it hasn't always necessarily been making sure that that information was penetrating to those who were making the decision. And so sometimes it's folks like the emergency managers, but now we're more and more looking at what this means from a community preparedness effort and making sure that that whole community is able to respond. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about equitable service delivery. It's really key. So I want to talk a little bit about how we show up in this space. And so I just did want to note that among those top priorities that we've set in the Weather Service, one of them is, as I mentioned, on recruiting and retaining the employees that we need to do this. We're establishing new partnerships to recruit folks into the Weather Service, into those different careers, but also identifying barriers that excludes folks from joining us or possibly from having an inclusive experience as they come on board. So we take this seriously, and we're really digging in on making sure we've got the best possible workforce to work within these communities. I also wanted to mention, because we've talked, you've probably heard terminology from Weather Service and from NOAA about weather ready nation and climate ready nation, and we see these as a seamless suite. When we sit down and work with our core partners on that decision-making space, and we're talking about some of these extreme events, often even though we're talking about events that are happening over the next 5 days or 10 days, even possibly out to 2 weeks, they may be asking questions or thinking about, well, how do I plan in the seasonal space? How do I plan in the yearly, annual space? And what kinds of information can be improved in that? At the Weather Service, we work out to 2 years and are partnering with our colleagues and climate scientist experts in OAR and NESDIS to make sure we understand that backdrop and referring to them if they're trying to understand the underlying changes that are happening on the climate time scale. So I just wanted to underscore, from when we talk about the climate ready nation at NOAA, we're talking again about decision makers, connecting decision makers with that information. So making sure decision makers and citizens have that equitable access to information so that they understand what that means and what the impacts and changes might mean for their economy, their natural resources, and the built environment. As we've gone around communities, we've heard from them that they want more comprehensive solutions. They want us to address things like excessive heat. I've got a note here about heat.gov, just noting that that's one of the key impact areas is heat, and people are starting to see those events happening more and more frequently. They're asking for support on flooding. I have a picture here of the new flood inundation mapping tools that we're building in the Weather Service. We're able to do those on demand now, and we're working with our funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law to build this out as a full capability across the country over the next 4 or 5 years. Really excited to be able to get down to neighborhood level information and show people where the water is going to be and where it's not going to be, which really helps them in planning for response. And I think everybody across NOAA has experienced over the last several years the emerging threat of fire, and but also the exciting advances in fire weather science. And so partnering with OAR and NESDIS to make sure our observing technologies, our modeling technologies can really move forward in this space so that we can provide the most advanced information there as well. So these are just a few of the areas in which we're focusing our efforts. So now I wanted to turn and give you a couple examples of infrastructure that's changing and going to help fuel this transformation. So NWS Chat, if you don't know, this is a messaging system that we've used internally in the Weather Service to keep real-time situational awareness across our NWS teams, but then we also make it available to our partners in emergency management, as well as force multipliers in the private sector like media. Our version 1.0 was internally built, and it was so successful that the demand for it and the resources and capacity it required really just expanded its capabilities. And we knew we needed to modernize. So I'm excited to say we're converting that system now from the legacy web-based system to a commercial, off-the-shelf, cloud-based solution that is fueled by Slack. So very excited about this. The timeline is that we started doing some testing and demonstration in 2022. Right now, we're working on training, making sure that all of our teams and their partners are getting trained. And we're going to be doing a demonstration pilot project in Pacific region, rolling it out there first, kick the tires a little bit in a smaller space. And by the end of 2023, the summer of 2023, we'll have everybody on that system. So we're very excited about this. This embodies that nimble, flexible. In this picture here, you can see you can easily just upload video, very easily. It works on all platforms. It can work on your phone, your tablet, your laptop, anything that you've got on the go. And you can immediately, any group that you're with, you can immediately say, let's huddle and have a video meet immediately with all your key decision makers. So really excited about the capabilities that this is going to provide to us. I mentioned cloud before as an enabling infrastructure, and one of the things that we're looking to do is to move AWIPS, which is our weather forecasting system that allows us to have, right now it's based on hardware that sits in every weather service office, that allows us to have that rigorous platform bringing all of our key data streams together for forecasters to have situational awareness, and then to build and generate and send out their key forecasts, watches and warnings. And so that's the system we have today. That is not portable, right? So you see in the picture here, we're trying to go from office-based, multiple screens, hardware in the back room that has been really core, to something that you can access through laptops and tablets out in the field with your partners. So we call this an AWIPS in the cloud approach. And we're excited to say that we're working right now on a prototype specifically to support our fire weather forecasters. I mentioned the fire. So those IMET deployments, folks who are deployed definitely need to have these mobile platforms. And then we hope we'll be able to use that in our emergency operations centers as well. And then building that larger infrastructure out, that'll take several years to fully more full scale go into AWIPS operations. But we're really excited about this. It's going to help give us that flexibility, nimbleness of where we can be. Also, it may be more efficient in terms of our distribution of the weather data, because we'll put it once into the cloud, and then everybody will be able to access it, which will allow us to give them access to higher quality observations and forecast data. So we're excited about this going forward. So now I do want to dig in on transforming services from a service equity perspective. We can think of risk communication as a system and a resource. And as a system, it's designed to share information with the greatest number of people. But often that means that we've designed that system as one size fits all and for the mainstream. So what about thinking about people's behaviors when it comes to ingesting information, thinking about folks who are non-English speakers, thinking about who has access to what kinds of information technologies, whether people need more time to make decisions, or what their particular vulnerability is. Folks are pretty familiar with CDC's vulnerability index, and this is an underlying component of what we do. I just wanted to thank our colleagues at UCAR who were able to provide some of this information. In social science, they've done a lot of excellent work for us on risk communication. So, the point here is that the risk communication itself, it's very necessary, but we've got to go farther to make sure we're reaching those most vulnerable. So, one way to think about this is, providing this matrix this is kind of breaking down that one size fits all approach that we've had as a legacy. There were a lot of assumptions here that people could receive the warnings, that people could understand them, that they had the capability to act upon them. and the willingness and the tools. Do they have transportation? Do they have special needs that makes it very difficult to be mobile? And there's different kinds of extreme events. There are some where sheltering in place is the best call to action. There are others where evacuating is the call to action. And so we have to think differently about what those kinds of response are. So if people can't, if they don't have a working vehicle, if they're wheelchair bound, if they don't have the financial resources perhaps to get a hotel or those other things, or just do not understand because of language barriers the urgency of the risk or the nature of the risk to them, these are all barriers in delivering our services. So increasingly, when people die as a result of a hazardous event, it's not necessarily because the forecast itself was not accurate enough or that it wasn't timely enough. It's because of this, most critical mile that we say, the last mile of the forecast of that information delivery. So thinking about Hurricane Ian, for example, over 90% of the fatalities were people who were over 60 years old. So what were the drivers of the reasons that those folks stayed in their homes? And so it just shows that there are subpopulations that are at higher risk, and we have to think differently about their understanding of the information, what they understand before events have, what other precursors or barriers there might be to taking action. So just wanted to provide a little case study. This is a tornado case study. And again, the background of this map is the CDC Social Vulnerability Index. That's that new lens with which we're looking at it. 2 tornadoes passed through the Jefferson, Orleans, and St. Bernard parishes, southeast of New Orleans. One was an EF3 that occurred on March 2022, and the second was an EF2 on December 14th. Both of them went through this Arabi neighborhood in the lower 9th Ward. And, one of the things in going through the fatalities and the statistics, the folks that were most impacted were some of the most vulnerable. So some of these had vulnerability levels of over 40 to 41% in those communities. And so some of the people that were affected by these tornadoes had challenges like limited vehicle access to be able to evacuate, poverty, pre-existing precursor conditions, if you will, that meant that some of the, in some cases these were, over 3 times the national average of vulnerable risks in these communities. So it's just a lens through which we need to look ahead of these events so that we can make sure that any mitigations possible with community leaders can be taken. So how we're trying to put this into action at the Weather Service is using the CDC Social Vulnerability Index into the tools that our forecasters have. This is one example of a prototype that we have, providing a dashboard, if you will, to the staff as they're looking at an event that's upcoming that they're predicting for, that this is a backdrop that they have, and they can immediately see some of those social vulnerability and outreach dashboard information that's going to be key. One of the things that we recently did at the American Meteorological Society meeting is we sat down with our partners in the nonprofit community as well as with the private sector and others in the academic community, and we asked them, we challenged them, how do we start meeting these gaps on service equity? And this is the word cloud that came out of that discussion. And basically, while it's a bit overwhelming, and you can see where to start on here as a list and grassroots and some other things, there's some common things about making sure that we've got consistency, that we talk together about setting priorities of where we can work together, and that we continue to build cross-sectoral trust as well as building those trusts in the communities and using the social science of community engagement to be able to address these challenges. So I'll end today just by talking a little bit about what it means to lead cultural transformation, right? So working from the bottom of this pyramid up to the top, everybody, we understand now what some of the results we're looking for, what kind of resilience we're trying to build. But we have to start at the bottom of this in terms of really understanding what's our mindset. What kinds of things do we need to learn? How can we be more open to better understand the communities we're serving and what some of those barriers are? And so we need to change at the people level. That's been my theme today. It's all about the people, right? So we need to change not just behaviors, but really change our core understandings and our mindset of how we're delivering those services. And then we can work up through changing behaviors and management systems. But once we get that core understanding of the mindset we're needing to deliver these services, that will help take care of all the other things up the pyramid. And I just want to say, this is challenging work. One of the things we're talking, you've heard many leaders talk about get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable space when we're tackling some pretty tough things. And we're challenging some of the assumptions of how we've delivered services in the past. And we need to take action even when we've got some uncertainty. So we're working hard on this, building places for change management, building places for dialogue. One of the terms we've come up with is we're relentlessly facilitating that dialogue. But the point is, as I noted here, that courage is really key. We really appreciate all of those across our teams that are working with courage. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is listening, and listening to those that we've perhaps least heard from in the past. So one of the things we're doing is providing tools to our team members across the Weather Service. We've got open suggestion boxes. What do they think we need to do to transform? We're working on our employee culture. We've created a change management unit to help us with some of these, trying to foster and encourage that culture of innovation across the organization. So thank you very much. We're very excited and focused and passionate about doing some of this transformation, and I look forward to talking about it with you.
Mary, that was fantastic. We have got several questions that have come in during the course of your talk, and is it okay if we open it up for a few questions here?
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Okay, great. First one we're going to start out with is fairly broad in nature. Are there any particular drivers behind this big transformation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Andy, and thanks to the team. A couple of drivers. I think if I go back a decade or so when we started the Weather Ready Nation effort, what we realized is we had a major tornado outbreak event, and we ended up losing as many lives in that event as something that happened 30 or 40 years ago, even though the forecast was incredibly accurate with longer lead times and that type of thing. And that was a big wake-up call for the Weather Service and sort of the birth of the focus on decision support and being really clear to our team that making the forecast was not the last step. We had already been working with emergency managers, but we really doubled down on that. So that was one start. And I would say over the last 2 or 3 years, with NOAA's leadership on service equity, that's been another lens. We did our own service equity assessment, and that was also very sobering when we recognized that we were blind to some of the barriers that existed for people receiving. So both of those things are really helping us to understand. As I said with Ian, we're still seeing fatalities, and so that means we've got more work to do. Thanks.
Okay, we've got a question that came in from Peter during your talk. How much do you think the rapid advancement of both our computational capabilities and the models we're running on those computers plays a role in making it difficult for the public to understand how we come to the conclusions we've come to? Any advice for scientists communicating these complexities?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. The first thing I thought of with your question, Peter, is that one of the other side effects of this availability and the rapid advancement is that it's available to more people, right? High school students are looking at the European model on their phones, right? So I think one of the challenges is that those who are not necessarily super formally trained, perhaps in interpreting these different models and assessing them, have access. We love the open data access, but it means you've got a lot of people looking at it, so that can create confusion. But I do think that one of the roles for our scientists is doing the clarifying and delivering the essence of the message, and turning that probabilistic, detailed information into things both visually, so making sure we're taking advantage of our GIS and other kinds of skills to create really easy to understand maps, and making sure we use social science to design those. One of the things we joke about inside the Weather Service is, oh, we designed that output for a meteorologist. And it's fine to design output for a forecaster, but that's not the same output that you create for communicating to decision makers. So I think that that's one of the components. But I do think the great thing about the advances is we're able to more quickly assimilate more data more accurately and higher resolution. So, you know, hopefully the core information itself is really much better information. It's all about how we communicate it. Thanks. Great question.
Okay, Mary, we've got a question from Paul that you may be able to build on some of the last information you gave us. Paul asks, given the success of officially embracing the third-party cloud-based solution Slack for redeveloping National Weather Service chat, can there be more formalized support around using Esri or ESRI cloud-based geospatial tools for supporting decision support activities via briefing displays, dashboards, etc., for both internal and external use?
Yeah, Esri's been a wonderful partner for NOAA, and I know many parts of NOAA are making use of that. I first got to know working with Esri when I was in the Ocean Service, and I believe Dr. Spinrad and Dr. Morgan visited with them just earlier this week. So we're definitely looking to continue that partnership. What exactly that looks like is I'm not sure, but at the same time, we're working with our Chief Data Officer, Tony Lavoie, to make sure that that everything we do is in open formats that everyone can use. So making sure those geospatial tools are accessible and usable. So yeah, there's different components of that, but yeah, absolutely, that's on the table.
Okay, we've got a question from Robert who asks, are there ways average people can help the National Weather Service?
That's a great question. I don't know what you mean by average people. I think all people have valuable perspectives. So I guess one of the things that I would say is, for example, we have cooperative observers. These are folks, anyone can sign up and go through our training for that. That helps us expand our network of observations, and even some of those observations that can be used to go into mesonettes and decision making. So taking observations, taking the training to report key weather, making sure whether you do that to the Weather Service office or help do it with there are different apps out there that people use to collect that. So being weather aware, and then also making sure that that you help carry the message of folks to be weather aware and pay attention when these things happen. It's a noisy world out there, as somebody was saying, in terms of the high resolution data. Just think of all the different things competing for people's attention. And one of the things we talk about is, how do you reach youth? The old things of television or radio and that kind of thing, they're not tapped into that. So it's one of the challenges of social media. So I would just say, spread the word, be weather aware, and spread the word when you get the word. Thanks.
Okay, great. We've got a question from Thomas. He says the National Weather Service in Indianapolis was in the news recently regarding their post in Spanish to serve that community. How is the National Weather Service, in a holistic way, expanding life-saving information to a broad and diverse user community?
Yeah, so we definitely have a language translation project that we're working on right now. I'm really excited to say that we're leveraging an SBIR company that has focused on this, and it's a really interesting combination of using AI, machine learning techniques, but also making sure you use subject matter experts, so meteorologists in this case, along with language experts. And so sometimes they're one and the same. We have a few for several languages. We actually have on board in NOAA native speakers that also are scientists, but the company we're working with also provides those experts. So we found it, we're just piloting that right now, and we're hoping that we'll be able to expand it to a lot more services and to several more languages. We're also talking quite a bit with state and local governments who are really interested in that. After Ida, and the deaths in New York City, if you recall the flash flooding that happened there, the state of New York reached out to us, reached out to FEMA and the FCC and others, and said, how can we get these information? So one of the things we're doing as a project right now, those call to action statements that I mentioned, those are pretty standard. There's many of them across different hazards, but we're trying to get all of those translated so that they're available and then they're ready to use whenever we need them. So that's one approach. But the other approach that I want to mention is we need to be connected with the trusted leaders in communities. So that goes beyond language, right? There may be all kinds of barriers, whether it's elderly, whether it's hearing impaired, all kinds of different communities that we need to be sure that the leaders of those communities have all the information they need and help us. So we're working in a lot of these different spaces to make sure that our information is getting through for all those communities. Great question. Thanks.
Mary, we've got a question from Courtney here that is kind of in a similar vein. Have we put any thought into hiring other backgrounds besides meteorologists with the strict educational requirements at the field level? I'm talking about more social scientists, graphic designers, or perhaps communication specialists.
Yeah, that's a great question, Courtney, and we are talking about that. My personal dream is that we'll get job series that are actually interdisciplinary. But until that time, we are both hiring individuals so that have diverse backgrounds. And so one of the things you'll see more and more of our meteorologists that we hire have one degree in meteorology, but one in perhaps emergency management, or one in meteorology and one in social science. And so individuals themselves have more diverse backgrounds, but we've created a social science program lead position in our science and technology integration office. And we are going to be building up the cadre of social scientists that we had, as well as we've got a great partnership on social science with OAR. So we're excited about doing that. So we're definitely doing that. And also thinking about, I was just talking with my team yesterday about communications specialists. So we do have a communications department, and we work with NOAA Public Affairs, the media specialists. So we're looking to see where we might need more skills in that perspective. So great question.
Okay, good deal. We have a question from Thomas here. Are there plans to enhance, expand, or modernize weather.gov? There are occasional access issues and not so positive press when that happens.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Good to hear from you. Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned, and I can make sure it gets included in the formal final slides here, is we actually have a top 10 priority list of projects, and updating weather.gov is one of those top 10. So we're looking at that. We're looking again at partnering with others to help us bring the modernization in. The biggest challenge, we have a survey out, by the way, and we can make sure we get that out as well to folks right now, asking all partners to give us information about what they feel they would like to see in a new weather.gov. So I'll make sure you get a copy, Tom.
Okay, Barry asks, will there be funding, either from appropriations or through other sources, to reach the Weather Forecast Office level for local projects dedicated to resilience? Not sure if that's something you can answer or not, but.
Well, I can talk a little bit about the kinds of things that are in bipartisan infrastructure law, and then talk about how that connects down to local offices. So In BIL, at least for what Weather Service is connected with, there's kind of three core categories of flooding. So we've got major resources there to work on the flooding. And so that is definitely going to cascade. We're working on the flood inundation mapping, and the outlet for that is going to be our river forecast centers, as well as our service hydrologists and those who have to respond at the local level. So we're working the training we're doing with rolling that out across the country with our own team members in the Weather Service. That's all being funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So that's one example that reaches down. Another example is in the area of fire. And again, we're a little more early in the space on that, but some of the initial efforts are going into resources to improve some of the instrumentation and tools that we have with our ASOS system and dissemination, some of those other things, as well as making sure, as I said, working on the tools for the IMETs. So it won't get to every forecast office, but it gets to many of those that are dealing with the fire or have the IMETs. And then also longer term, the work that our partners in OAR and NESDIS are doing is going to enhance the level of tools that we have for fire weather. So that'll get to everybody. So that's one way. But I think probably another key piece that is partnership between OAR and Weather Service is the social science work that I mentioned. We've embedded both in those fire projects and in the flooding projects social science work. And we're creating longitudinal databases so that we can, as events happen, we can be doing real-time surveys of how folks responded and received information and feed that immediately back into our system, asking similar questions after each and every event. So we create that longitudinal over time type of database. So all of those are going to be tools that will reach down to the local office. Great question.
Mary, I think we've got time for just a couple more questions. So we have one from Josh here. The establishment of a full and formal climate services capability within NOAA at a longer time scale across diverse sectors seems always to be just over the horizon. Can we expect any progress organizationally in this area in the next 2 years or beyond?
So I can't speak personally to all of the work that OAR is doing in this area, but I know they're working to advance the service delivery through our drought information system, as well as opportunities for grants out to communities on climate data. Some of that is being funded as well by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as I mentioned. And several of that, some of the rules of the road, if you will, for that BIL funding is specifically to make sure that we're focused on getting it out to communities, with diverse backgrounds. So I do think there's seed corn, if you will, being laid from some of that investment. Within the Weather Service, where we're just focused on that 0 to 2 years kind of time frame. Again, because we're already in those communities, it's easy for us to be one of the deliverers, if you will, of that information, or partners. And one of the places where I think we can really continue to double down on this is with our regional teams. Those are amazing groups of folks that have that expertise across all the line offices that also are regional and local enough that they have the experiences of those communities. So I hear your impatience, and at the same time, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate that it comes from passionately trying to provide these services. But I do think that there's some efforts and the right kind of focus now at the NOAA level on climate ready services that's really going to help us move the needle. Thanks. Okay,
last question, Mary. The National Weather Service has a large part of its workforce that still works rotating shifts to meet the 24/7 by 365 mission. What types of challenges does that pose, and how are you meeting them?
Yeah, as a result of our feedback from our workforce, and one of the things we're really pleased about and have benefited from is having a public health officer. We have Lieutenant Commander Valerie Gardner, who works with us, that is a behavioral health and wellness specialist, and she's able to get out and talk to our team that's right on the front lines in all types of situations. With feedback from our workforce, from her, as well as from NOAA, our union, and from the NOAA burnout survey, we recognized that shift work flexibility is really important. We work shifts based on a fairly old model, and we know that takes a toll on people. And so what we've done is we've created a shift work flexibility team. And this is in partnership and co-led with NOAA, our union, and we've asked them to really tee up a number of actionable recommendations. So we've already implemented the first two recommendations. The first was to make sure we had a repository of all the different flexibilities that are already allowed and agreed to in our collective bargaining agreement that all offices can use to help increase the awareness and understanding of that. And the second was to institute recuperative breaks, to make sure the science is very clear that even a small 15 or 20-minute break away from the screen, when it's operationally safe to do so with a supervisor's position, can really make a huge difference in somebody's ability to be sharp and stay safe. So those are two things we've already implemented. We're also considering adjusting staff across the different roles we have in that in the forecasting. So thinking about the people we have at different levels. Do we have too many people working one kind of shift, not enough people on another kind of shift? We don't want any one group overly burdened or overly having to do much more frequent difficult shifts or midnight shifts. So we're looking at that, and we're looking at how we might right size the staff across those shifts. So, longer term, we're looking forward to what kinds of suggestions the team brings to us. We may look at other solutions as well. It's a great question.
Okay, Mary, with that question, I think we're at the bottom of the hour here, running out of time. I just want to thank you. It's been fantastic. We've gotten a lot of positive comments on the question line. So thank you so much for speaking with us today, Mary. Really appreciate it. And again, thank you to all who make the NELS possible. And thank you to all the participants. So thanks, everyone, for joining us, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.